Dolby Atmos music is undoubtedly one of the most emotional musical experiences I've ever had.
It's like hearing music for the first time again. It's a guttural, visceral reaction.
I would say that Dolby Atmos music is an exciting new frontier in music technology.
It's the future. It's that next step that I would always describe to somebody as the idea of when mono went to stereo.
It's super creative canvas to work on, and I love it. I love it. I love thinking that way as an arranger and as a producer and a writer.
The idea of being wrapped in music is just one of the best things ever. You can't beat that.
Here at Axis Audio, we wanted to build the best sounding room that we could within our budget. And I feel like we've done that. We decided on an all-Neumann KH speaker line playback system. It's done really well for us. And we treated it like we would any other space, really. There are just a few more considerations. Since you have more speakers, you have more reflection points. But it was really important to have a full range playback system.
We wanted to really commit to building a Dolby Atmos music space. One of the big things that we really kind of honed in on was needing something that was bigger than what we had. Wherever we go to, let's try the best we can to get to equidistant. And especially for music, that seems to translate a little bit better for us. The first time that we saw this room, immediately we were like, this is probably the best we're gonna get with the budget we have right now. So if there's a way to make it happen, we gotta do it.
Our system is driven from an Avid Matrix Studio interface. That's really the brain of the entire system. We share the space, and if we have slightly different preferences for tuning or anything like that, with the Avid Matrix Studio, we can program all that in and change it at the push of a button.
I do most of the mixing exclusively for the two of us, and Mike is always very heavily involved in the mastering process, especially with Dolby Atmos music.
A lot of the creative side of Dolby Atmos music happens on the mix side. So Webster is the one who's making more of those choices, those creative choices about where to place things in the immersive sound field and how to envelop the listener in the sound. My role is maybe a little more technical in that I'm trying to make sure that it's translating properly.
When you're mixing in Atmos, you're not mixing to a playback format, you're mixing to a space. It can be decoded and played back to any device. That was the really, truly exciting thing to me of like, this is a format that now we can mix in, and that can be it. You get to have ultimate control and create this soundscape that's well beyond what our normal experience is. And the possibilities for that are endless and really just exciting.
I've known my partner, Lauren Johnson, for a long time, and he approached me one day and said, how would you like to mix music in Atmos? And the hook was set, and we did a proof of concept, a set of mixes, and then we got to work on designing this room. Lauren and I decided on using a modified lighting truss to hang the speakers on. What we like about the Yamahas is that they're tight, they're full range, they're smooth, they sound great. And what we wanted was a hybrid of a music room and a film room.
90% of what we do in a mix is in the near field and getting a great mix. And so we wanted that really tight configuration. And then Scott's background coming from not only music, but also film, we wanted to design the room where it really had the best of both. And we want to be able to hear everything clearly. And then we have limited space, and how can we make this work? And so we talked about how to configure something that not only could we set it up, we could reproduce it. We watch a lot of professionals in the industry that are hearing Dolby Atmos music for the first time. And so they'll come in and it's just a great response. And I think they just start to get super excited. And we try to envision even further and just say, you know, imagine creating specifically for this.
My last project, I wrote with Atmos in mind. So the three-dimensional placement makes you feel like you're in the room with the musicians.
Every instrument has its place. When you start separating things out, you really hear it. I think more and more as people adopt the technology, I think there's going to be some amazing experiences live. we'll be sitting in movie theaters just to listen to records. And then how it all matches with video and head tracking and, you know, live concert footage and all that, we're here to help.
When I finally heard that Dolby was doing Atmos music, I jumped. I was like, okay, I'm ready. What do I need to do? That was almost 2 years ago that I decided to do this room. And the difference now is that it's something that's accessible to the consumer. It's not something that takes a huge investment. It's not something that takes a huge technical know-how. And that's why this thing is winning. The goal behind this room was to be as accurate as possible across all formats. I'm using ATCs as my LCR. Those are accompanied by SVS subwoofers. For all of the other speakers, I've chosen JBL 306P Mark IIs, and it's amazing how they've locked in and work absolutely fantastically. The signal flow for the studio is a Mac Pro. I'm utilizing the Focusrite 16 line interface. From the 16 line, everything just goes out directly to speakers. So that is the path. It's clean, it's simple, and one of the great things about being my own room is I don't have to have a setup that flexes and changes depending on who's going to be in here or interfacing in a multi-room facility, but I was able to build a very concise, completely flexible system where my hands aren't tied. Now every mix I do in stereo, I'm thinking Dolby Atmos music. The openness and the dynamic of Dolby Atmos music is huge. I think this is the next level of creativity, and several artists that I've had in, producers that I've had in to hear their Atmos mixes, the immediate reaction is, oh, this will change the way I think about everything. And I love that. I think it's a new frontier for us creatively, with Atmos music being the primary intent to deliver this experience.
Today I'm excited to be joined by one of Nashville's premier mixing and mastering duos from their 914 Axis Audio studio, mix engineer Webster Tileston and mastering engineer Mike Monseur. They've built a beautiful room on the second floor of a home centered around a Neumann speaker system, which truly sounds fantastic. The room features a very clean design, great vibe. They do amazing work for the likes of Diplo, Dylan Francis, and Little Big Town, amongst others, which you can check out on enabled streaming music services now. You can also see them as part of a new Nashville-based studio profile video on the Dolby YouTube page that highlights flexible home studio configurations. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Doing great. Yeah.
You guys have built a beautiful room there on the second floor of a home centered around a Neumann system, which sounds fantastic. Very clean design, great vibe. I mean, you do amazing work for the likes of Diplo, Dylan Francis, Little Big Town, which is available, some of which is available on streaming music services. Webster, give us a little bit of background about yourself and kind of how Axis Audio came together.
So I started getting into audio engineering when I was 13, 12 or 13, and started doing a lot of more live mixing. And I grew up playing drums, so that quickly transitioned into me trying to figure out how to record my drums, and that just kind of spiraled into the studio world. So by the time I was 13 or 14, knew that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and just focused on that. So I was in college doing a lot of studio work, and ended up graduating and doing a lot of touring work right out of school, but still doing studio work. Actually, my freshman year of college, that's when I met Mike. I interned at a studio in Washington, just outside Washington, D.C., called Bias Studios, where he was the in-house mastering engineer. And I was basically the intern that just worked for him for the whole summer. And we kept in touch. Fast forward to 2016. No, 18. I don't know. Somewhere in there. He'll fill in the gaps, but he decided to make the move down to Nashville, and we kind of just started working together. And we had always been working together like a little bit more separately, where I was pretty much sending anything that needed to be mastered over to him. But when he moved down here, it became a little bit more kind of hand in hand in tandem. And then in the end of 2019, we had the opportunity to hear at Dolby Atmos room here in town. And that was the first time I got to hear Dolby Atmos for music. Unfortunately, that experience was not the best of experiences. However, shortly thereafter, the beginning of 2020, was able to experience binaural and realize that that was a part of the experience that could then be consumed on headphones. And that's kind of when I got really excited about it. So right before the pandemic, I was starting to get interested. And then when the pandemic hit, it gave me a lot of time to really delve in. So I started experimenting a lot with it, building out a small space kind of one by one. Started with a quad 4.0 system, moved it to a 6.0 system, moved it to a 6.0.2 system, and just kind of built it to see how it would work. And eventually kind of went just right into it and was like, okay, this is the next thing. I think it's really cool. And that's kind of when Mike and I really started to work even more together with everything, because we finally kind of found this point where we were both interested in it and knew that there was no way that either of us could make it happen on our own. So that was great. And I'll kind of let him kind of talk about what that process looked like with him moving down here, what he did before, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in the Washington, D.C. area. I started I started my mastering career just out of high school as the assistant to a mastering engineer in town. And I was there working for Bias Recording Studios as their in-house guy for a number of years. Um, all told, I had 15 years in the business before I decided to move to Nashville. I was just getting to an age and a point where I thought, okay, I need to try this now. It's now or never. I didn't have anything tying me too much to DC, so I made the jump, and Webster and I were able to work together, find a spot where we could have our two kind of separate studios in one place. And
Yeah, back when we were both only in stereo.
yeah, he was mixing, I was mastering full time.
Yeah.
And then, like Webster said, we heard a very early Dolby Atmos music demo. And it was really cool. It was very interesting. It was tough because there were so many people in the room. It was hard to really hear what was going on, but it sparked an interest for sure. And then as Webster started building an Atmos mix setup, I would come in and listen, and we talk about it a little bit. And ultimately, what really made me a believer was when we finally had all of the same speaker brand in one room. So we settled on the Neumann KH speaker line. You see the KH 420s behind us here. We have 310s on the side and 120s up above us. But once we did that, everything really locked in, and we both felt like, yeah, this really works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got kind of the equidistant setup there. It really sounds fantastic. What were you guys looking to achieve from like an aesthetic point of view? Like what was the vibe you were going for? And then two, like how did you implement and design the system? How did you make the choices for the signal flow?
So aesthetically, we just wanted something that was clean, but still had a little bit of character. So because of COVID, we had all this time to do SketchUps and think about what we really wanted it to look like. We were able to design the furniture that we're using. We designed our desk and side racks. We thought about the lighting, things like that. We were able to find this space that had high ceilings, and it's a pretty big open room. You can't really tell, but behind the camera, it goes another 15 feet back, something like that. So it just worked acoustically, but also aesthetically. I think we're really happy with the way everything tied in with color and the wood we used for the racks and desk and everything.
Yeah, I think what Mike was saying, like to extend that a little bit, just like the openness, that was something that we kind of wanted. We wanted something that when people walk up, it doesn't feel cramped. And that's partially for clients, but then also for us, it's a nice feeling to walk into a space that has a lot of room and some natural light in it that just keeps us from feeling like we're trapped in a dark cave all day.
Yeah, we were really fortunate to find a space that had some natural light.
Yeah.
and it was still quiet, and we could work and not disrupt anybody else. And also, it was just quiet enough to hear low-level detail.
Yeah. And then, I mean, as far as system design goes, I mean, Mike touching on the speaker decisions earlier was kind of how we ended up with Neumann. As far as the design goes, the first room that I was messing around with Atmos in was small. I mean, it was, I think, 14, at most it was 14 deep and maybe 10 to 12 wide with like 8-foot ceilings. And I had clouds in it. So the 8-foot ceilings were even a little smaller or lower. So overall, the in that room and the experience I had in there, I didn't have an awesome experience with an orthogonal layout. That being said, that was also not with a full system, and like definitely not as precise as what this room we took the time to build this room to be. But there was also something about, like, even just in the research I had done from the Dolby white papers and everything, that equidistant just seemed to make more sense to me. And I think part of that too stems from my experience as a system engineer touring. My perspective for a lot of things is that if you can get it right in the natural, like naturally right at the right distance, then that's better than trying to fake it into the right position by using delay. And I understand that there are constraints always. I mean, even in this room, we don't have the ceilings at the perfect distance away, but we do have them at the correct angular attack, where it's exactly 45 degrees off center and 45 degrees vertical. And that was important to us early on, just from, I think, a theoretical standpoint, because we hadn't experienced it. That we kind of looked at it and we're like, this is important because that's where it's supposed to actually be coming from. So if we're gonna delay it, it needs to go back like in line from where it's aiming.
Yeah, for music, the equidistant layout just seemed to work better for us in general.
Yeah.
It just kind of clicked in naturally. And our, if you want to call it, our design philosophy with the room was that it should be as full range as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So what you can't really see behind us are that there are Neumann KH 870 subs under the LCR, and that extends the response down to about 14 hertz. Is what we measured anyway. And so you can hear all kinds of stuff with that, and catch lots of problems that turn up. So a full range setup was important to us from the get-go, and I'm glad we made that decision.
Yeah, and I definitely think, going off of that too, like I think that's something that, having interned with Mike at such a young age, I became very invested in making sure that I had as high quality as a front, I guess what Dolby would refer to as a B chain. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the speakers, the speakers and converters could possibly be, to make sure that I'm hearing exactly what I'm doing. So I think for I feel like I definitely got invested in that a lot sooner in my career than some people do, and Mike and I resonate on that a lot. So for us, it was just such a high importance for us, and it ends up being great. And I think, especially for mastering, that's even more important, just to be able to catch those things that will be missed or can be missed on a lower resolution system.
It also extended the headroom of the system too.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, we can meet. Well, we tried to stay as close to the Dolby specs as possible,
Yeah.
and try to meet them as closely as possible. So we can hit the SPL requirements with the 420s across the front and the subs. The 310s keep up really, really well in the sides and rear. And because you're not driving a ton of low end information into the ceiling, typically the 120s keep up fine.
Yeah, and because they're not as far away in this room, we have them. They're a little closer, even though they're in the right position, but we have them delayed a little bit.
And against a boundary, so you get a little help from that.
Mm-hmm.
But at its core, you're getting a lot of accuracy without much compensation, which is great. And that's a wonderful way to kind of have the mastering tandem and mixing tandem sort of go together, right? And so let's talk a little bit about like the working process from the two of you. Like, from the time that you're delivered the session, do you guys like pass the mixes back and forth as the album's progressing? Or do you, Webster, you typically like finish the mix and pass it over to Mike? Kind of how's it go down?
It's still kind of I would say it's an ever changing process. As anything with Atmos is right now, I feel like every day we're learning new things and finding new ways to accomplish things and do it better. It is such a new thing that it's kind of just we have come up with processes that seem to work well, but it's kind of up in the air every project that we get, and that's cool. Like that's one of the things that I've always appreciated working with Mike is that pretty much in the midst of every project, we're constantly having conversations, being like, "Hey, did this work for you? Like, is this the best way for me to deliver it to you?" Um,
But
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, typically Webster will ingest all of the files
Yeah.
from the client, set everything up in Pro Tools, and dive into the mix. So, he's checking things against the stereo master,
Hmm.
and uh, there's just a laundry list of things that we are very careful about. We're trying to make sure we have all the pieces in place, all the correct versions of files, especially when you get to stems, people sending stems, making sure it's really the most up to date and complete set that they have. You can talk about like breaking stems out more.
Yeah. I mean, for the mix side of things, it's definitely in some ways, it's if if you're working from stems of a stereo mix, it is almost as challenging sometimes, depending on who you're working with and how prepared they are and how much they know about the format. Even if they know about the format, sometimes you kind of get what you get. So it's always kind of for me on the front end, I'm doing a lot of communication with NR artists and producers and engineers, constantly kind of being like, look, like here's I can work with what you've given me, but if you really want to have like the highest quality and the best kind of experience, these are the things that you can give me that will enhance that for the final product. And that's kind of where my world is, and I'll do a lot of the creative positioning and things. I'm actually doing a lot of, and this is something that Mike and I have been kind of trying a lot more of recently with more independent artists, is we'll be doing mixes natively in Atmos and using the stereo re-render for what we actually turn into the stereo master. So that's a little bit different than what a lot of the industry is doing right now, and we've had great results with it. But all that said, whether it's from stems or it's from raw multi-tracks where we're present or basically doing the stereo version as well, I'll go through pretty much all of that with the client on the front end, go through the whole mix process, and then sometimes I'll get Mike involved. Normally, actually, we'll get Mike involved at that point where I finish the mix, and then we'll go through our basically what I'll call our first round of QC and reference. And that's one of, I would say, the most important aspects of what we do, and one of the things that we really try to make sure that people understand that we take care of, because it's such an important aspect. And I'll kind of let Mike chime in as to what that looks like.
Yeah, as Webster's mixing, I might pop up and take a listen to it. He might say, "Hey, what do you think about this? Do you have any comments?" And then he'll bounce the mix out, and I will listen through the MP4, listening in spatial audio on my iPhone. I'll listen to the binaural re-render, listen to the 2.0, uh, and I'll make any comments anything I can think of that he might want to tweak.
Yeah. And if it's from stereo masters, I'll send the stereo master with it so he can cross compare versus that, just to see if it's really straying off of what the original intent was.
And we'll check to make sure we have all the parts
Mm-hmm.
in the song. Every once in a while, somebody will send you a stem that's missing one background vocal or something. But yeah, I'm just listening for technical stuff too, clicks, pops, anything like that. Then typically Webster will do mix revision, print it again, we QC it all again, and then send it off to the client.
Yep. And then if the client is having Mike master before that QC, that second round of QC phase, I'll print that mix and then send it to Mike. It kind of depends on the client at that point then too, as to whether or not they want to hear it between the mix phase and the master phase. A lot of the stem based mixes that I'm doing, the client is pretty much just, they want to hear it at the very end.
And labels are always in a pretty big rush, so
Yeah.
sometimes it's just a really fast process, and you're trying to get it out the door to the client in their hands for distribution as quickly as you can.
And Webster, you're adding the headphone metadata in most cases, or is that a combination of
Yeah. I work out of a template that I've built out in advance. So when I'm going through and doing everything, I'm actually setting all of that metadata as I'm mixing. So by the time that it gets to Mike for QC and reference before mastering, he's experiencing it with pretty much set metadata. If there's a point where he's listening to something and something sticks out, most of the time he will communicate that to me, and more likely than not communicate to me how it sounds, not with like the descriptor of being like, hey, that sounded like it was in far, it needs to be in off mode or something, and then I'll take that into account and figure out if that's the right way to fix it, or if it's better fixed by some EQ or compression or something like that. So that's kind of the normal way of going about it. By the time it gets to the mic, most of the time, the way that it's rolling through is that the binaural metadata is all set. And that's another thing that we've figured out and had to work through a lot, is having to figure out how to best make that work for albums and making sure that the binaural metadata is consistent all the way through, which is a great thing that has, I would say, streamlined our process a ton, is just the fact that most of the time when a project comes through and I'm working on it, I tend to be the only mix guy that's working on it, which then makes it so the binaural, I know what my setup's going to be, and it's going to be that way for the whole album, which has been really helpful.
Yeah, and on the mastering side, um, people always ask me, well, it must be so different. What is it like mastering a project in Dolby Atmos? And honestly, it's really not all that different. All the same principles apply. I'm still listening for the same things. I'm still trying to make it as impactful as possible. With Atmos, you have a few level limitations. There are target levels that you're trying to hit and not go above so that it folds down properly. So I'm trying to make things punch as much as possible within those limitations. And I'm doing things to make sure that things feel like they're moving around you, that things aren't too static sometimes.
Yeah.
And just all the regular stuff, low end issues, mud, noise, clicks, pops, all the typical stuff. So it's the same thing, but on a larger scale. And it's a little more time consuming.
Yeah. And I would say that for me personally, like there were a couple projects I did early on that did not go through a mastering phase. And they sound fine. Like I'm proud of them. It translates fine. It works. But the few times that we've been both brought in on projects, and when we do mix and master, I've found that it's a huge, huge change, and most especially with its translation with spatial and binaural. I mean, it definitely levels up in a speaker-based format, but there's always been a huge moment where like I'll go to the QC and reference phase post master, and having experienced it, knowing what it was pre-master, I'll listen to it and be like, this is this is incredibly better than what it was, and it was good before, but that was what it really needed to just make it really hit. And I think since that's what 90+% of the listener base is probably consuming on, I think that's a really important step.
When I master something, I rely on Webster to QC my work.
Yeah.
So we're always passing things back and forth. It's always better to have a couple sets of ears on it.
Mm.
There are so many little parts with this that the more accurate we can be, the better. You know, we don't want anything to go out that's wrong. So yeah, QC is very important to us.
Absolutely. And do you guys have a streaming service playing back through the system as well?
Yeah. So I guess we have an AVR receiver in here that's able to output 714 on balanced analog connectors. So we've got that going back into our system where we can reference. And I think now that Apple has updated the OS where you can do it kind of natively from the machine, that's super helpful. We are sticking with our older OS for a little longer before diving in on it. So we're going to keep using the AV receiver for a little while. But that's been a great way for us to kind of listen to commercial mixes, figure out kind of where things are. There's a lot of stuff that's released that does not sound great, and then there's a lot of stuff that's released that sounds awesome, and it's kind of a good thing for us to be able to drop between it, and also quite honestly just be able to reference even our own stuff after the fact, to hear it post encode and decode the whole way through the system, just to see if there's anything that changed between when we were finally a part of it to when it's in the user's hands, you know.
And certainly we're also always checking to see how things translate with spatial audio
Yeah.
and Apple Music. So that's certainly a concern and something that we pay close attention to. And sometimes we go back and we'll make adjustments based on how that translates.
Yep. So as early adopters, you guys have really seen kind of the growth and the potential for the scalability that continues kind of from studios to streaming, now to gaming systems, cars, live venues. Is there anything that really excites you about, where things are going and the scalability and the promise of kind of more accessibility to this art that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say one of the most exciting things is we had the chance to get a custom HRTF taken, and that was pretty amazing. I I was skeptical going in, and it completely changed my mind about binaural. Um, it was the most convincing binaural representation I had ever heard. In fact, it kind of fooled me. Um, it was hard to tell that it wasn't the speakers I was hearing, it was actually the headphones. So I think as that technology evolves and it gets into the consumer's hands, Dolby Atmos has just a great potential to be consumed by the public in a very cool way. I mean, I'm excited for what is possible with it, and I've really enjoyed hearing it on speakers. I can't wait till the headphone presentation is even better, since that is a huge part of the market.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this much: he always hated binaural, so the fact that he's saying this is groundbreaking. Yeah, we the binaural and spatial representations. I mean, early on, I remember that's what got me into it. Like I said, like that first experience on speakers was cool, but there wasn't really any explanation behind like how the renderer worked, how it could scale to different format, like different speaker layouts and things like that. So to me, I heard it and was like, okay, well that's a cool experience. It sounds great, but this is like a $350,000 speaker rig, and not only is the consumer never going to spend that type of money on speakers, they're not going to know how to set it up correctly. And those two things alone were like, it's out. Like I'm out. Like it's cool. I hope I get to experience it again. But like this was built for me. This wasn't built for the people that are paying my checks. So that was kind of a bummer. But when I got to hear even the first instance of binaural, I think it was like a demo that Avid did at NAMM, and they were basically streaming the binaural through a YouTube video, and the guy was panning an organ around, and I was like, oh, like it wasn't great, but it was good enough for me to be like, all right, there's something there. And I think that's when that's what got me into it, looking into it, reading about it, and from a lot of the like kind of my history and background of education in audio and things like that, and system design and all of these things, I looked at the binaural experience as like something that had so much potential to like really just be incredible at some point, and that right now it's just not at the point to be able to be like readily accessible, but it's right, like all of the technological things are so close to taking off to being able to do it.
the technology is evolving so quickly
Yeah.
that every year there's something really cool that comes out, like the Sonos systems. We've heard those.
Yep.
They're very, very cool. I was really surprised how well it translated in some rooms and how it wrapped around.
Yep.
That's certainly a consumer format, or a way, I should say, that consumers can hear this stuff. The headphone stuff is going to get better. I'm a huge fan of the Apple AirPod Maxes, and the way that some stuff translates in spatial audio is really, really cool. It's hard. It takes work to make it translate across all systems, but if you take the time, it is doable.
Yeah. And I think to kind of tangent off of what he was saying about the Sonos rig, like that was another thing that got exciting to me, was me realizing that consumer playback systems like a soundbar have gotten so accessible from a cost perspective, but then also from a technological perspective. People have the ability to sit at their couch after they've bought a system and set 3 or 4 speakers around them and use their phone to calibrate it. That didn't exist even half a decade ago, not at least not cost effectively. So that kind of starts qualming my concern of a consumer being able to set up the rig correctly. So that starts to help that out a lot. And yeah, and the binaural thing, I mean, for me, I looked at it and was like, okay, head related transfer functions are just going to keep on getting better. And that was part of the thing of looking at when I'm going into a mix perspective. And one of the things that I try to tell almost every client that I work with is that get it right on speakers. Like, don't play the game. Do not play the game of just mixing it on headphones, because that's what people are going to listen to it on. Because it is, like, inevitably, and from our experience, like binaural and spatial are slight changes. And that's why we have to like figure out how to get it kind of to translate across all of them. But if you, in my mind, the way that I look at it is if you can get it right in a well calibrated room, then that basically makes it so that mix will then just keep getting better represented on headphones as the technology progresses.
Yeah, a criticism I faced from some people in the audio world was, well, you guys are crazy. You have this really expensive speaker system. Nobody listens that way. But the way I feel about it is it's the same thing, just like it is with stereo work. You get the best playback system you can afford. You don't know what you have unless you can hear it properly. It makes life a lot easier. When it translates on the big system, it typically translates well everywhere else. It's how it's always been. Same thing with my stereo mastering work. When it feels right here, I know that it's translating elsewhere. So, and the technology is evolving and getting better all the time. When spatial audio was first announced and we heard our Dolby Atmos work in spatial audio, it was different than we expected, and it's evolved in a great way, and it's getting better and better all the time. So now sometimes the spatial version of some projects is my favorite version of it in headphones.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's really great perspective. Thank you guys for sharing that, and some really great insight and experience that you've brought to this entire creative process, having been there from very close to the beginning and seeing the evolution. I think it's, really fantastic to get that perspective from you both, coming from the creative side of things and kind of how your roles fit into bringing these artists' projects to life and getting them out there to the world to be able to hear, and accurately translating with creative intent in mind. So I'll close by asking you guys this. I mean, the vibe in Nashville is incredible. Over the past couple of years, each time I've been there, it seems like things are growing and evolving around Atmos. But I wanted to ask you guys, taking a step back from Atmos, like, how would you describe just the Nashville music scene in general, maybe from a studio perspective, but also from a fan perspective, being fans of music yourself?
I mean, I moved down here in 2010. I went to Belmont University and graduated in 2014. So I've been here over a decade now, which is crazy to think about. And one of the things that I kind of realized, like, Belmont was kind of an interesting time because coming up toward, I interned, like I said, I interned with him the summer after my freshman year. And when I was coming up toward my graduation, my junior and senior years, I was considering going back and moving to DC and working out of the studio there. And I think as that time kind of, as I kept getting closer to that, I kept on just kind of having this realization of like, well, like DC is like does have a good music scene, but it's definitely not what this is. And I've been here for 3 to 4 years now, and not only have I made relationships with professors and then with industry veterans that are in town, I've also created all these relationships with all of my my friends and these people that are around me that are going to stay here and are going to be working in the industry for years. And that has, I think that was kind of like a chance. Like I was assuming that in my head, but that's exactly what has happened. There are so many people that I have in some way either knew from going to school with them or from them being in the industry that I around here for those 4 years, that the amount of overlap and interchange over the past decade plus has been incredible and really surprising too, like in some ways that you would never expect and think of, like people I haven't heard from in like 8 years, and then I'll get like a text message being like, hey man, like heard you're doing this from this person, we need it, are you like, would you be interested in working together? And it's just super crazy that how like it's a big scene but it's a small town kind of thing, and it has this kind of real familial communal aspect to it, I think, where I mean there are plenty of people that do everything here. I mean, it's definitely a big pond situation, but it's definitely a situation where people seem to get uh, something about the town has this sense of loyalty to it, where it's everybody kind of understands that you're all in the same rat race together, and if there's a way to win at it collectively, that's much more exciting and rewarding than just kind of forcing your way to the top and shoving everybody else aside. And that's been a really cool thing that has probably kept me here for as long as it has.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, hey, Nashville's Music City. It has an incredibly long, long history of amazing music. And moving here was certainly scary. You're moving into a place where it's just saturated with people who operate at a very, very high level in the music business. So for me, it was good. I had to step up my own game. I had to learn new things, and you always have to stay competitive. But at the same time, like Webster said, there's a fairly communal feeling here, and people are, I found, more, I don't know if it's more willing or just more likely to collaborate on things and share information. So I'm in touch with a bunch of different mix engineers in town. They send me work, we're friends. That introduces me to other people in the industry here. And generally, everyone's very friendly and welcoming. And hey, there are just what an amazing amount of studios in this town. Everything you need is around the corner. Instruments, audio gear, whatever it is, it's going to be here. And you have the top-notch players, top-notch engineers, uh, people who were my childhood engineering heroes are based here. People like Ted Jensen at Sterling Sound. You know, he's somebody I've always looked up to. I've seen his name on records ever since, as far back as I can remember. And now he's here at Sterling Sound in Nashville, just down the street. So if that's not a stamp of approval, I don't know what is.
Totally. I feel you both on that. Like great explanation, and just congratulations on all the amazing work you're doing there, and how things have progressed, and just all the support that you guys are giving to the community out there as well, and the networking that you're talking about doing. It's special and it's important. What records can people check out in Atmos that you guys have done?
The new Diplo album is up and running, and we mixed that in Atmos. That one was just a mix project. There's an album that we did for this artist called Alexander Pappas. Mike mastered that one as well as me mixing
on Capitol CMG.
Capitol CMG. Another one from another Capitol artist, Mac Powell. We did mastering. We did mix and master on that as well.
That's great.
Dylan Francis is another one. That was the Happy Machine album. Gorgon City's album we did. And then the new Little Big Town single we've done as well. I don't know if that one's available yet. It's definitely at mastering or past mastering. So that's not sure if the upload has happened yet on that one. But those are the kind of the big ones. There's some other probably
some big recent ones. We have some great local Nashville independent musicians like Garrett Mosher is one of them.
Yeah, and that one's a cool one too to check out because that was the stereo re-render. There's like 3 or 4 singles out right now from that album. The full album's dropping I think in the next couple months, but that one was done completely from scratch from multi-tracks that he handed us because he kind of self-produced it, and I utilized the stereo re-render and handed it to Mike, to which he mastered the stereo re-render to get it up to competitive levels, and also mastered the Atmos version to kind of clean that up and keep that within the right levels and get it to really hit well, which was awesome.
Awesome, guys. Webster, Mike from Access Audio in Nashville, thank you both so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
All right, we will jump into Q&A with Webster and Mike here in a second. Please drop your questions into the question box in the GoTo app. And just quickly, be sure to check out all the resources that we have available at professional.dolby.com. That's including the 90-day trial download of the Dolby Atmos Production Suite software, all of our Dolby Music, post knowledge base, FAQ, and user forum information. There are also quick start videos there, in-depth tutorials, guides, and videos.
And of course, all of the onboarding material and support documents for studios, labels, and creatives to guide you through your Dolby Atmos music journey. That's everything from distribution all the way through to playback, starting with content creation. So tons of resources there, and those forums and the FAQs, they're really user powered as well. So if you have questions, you have thoughts, you have ideas, that's a great place to put them in. And you can also email us at musicwebinars@dolby.com with any additional webinar-based questions or suggestions or any of that. But with that, very happy to be joined once again by Webster Mike at Axis in Nashville. Gentlemen, good to see you. And we've gotten some really great questions so far, quite a few that have come into the chat, a few that were pre-submitted. Starting with James here, who has a question about Atmos QC, and you guys talked about this in quite a few different ways, but maybe to kind of just reiterate a little bit for those who may have missed it or any additional color that you'd like to add. He's asking, how do you reconcile the difference between the sweet spot in the studio and the consumer experience in different environments, including on headphones? That's really a massive question, isn't it? That's really everything that you do. So if you were able to kind of chat a little bit further on it, please do.
Yeah, you want to take that one first?
Sure. I think the biggest thing for us is kind of baked into that QC and reference process, checking it on the different formats that we have available to us to see how they're going to translate. But one of the things that we've really found is that you can, if you have a room that is set up to the Dolby specifications and is properly calibrated, and has the bandwidth and power to meet those specifications. Honestly, just even with the renderer and the ability to do live real-time re-renders where you can monitor in the different formats between a full Atmos playback and 5.1, 7.1 stereo. All of those things have kind of, to me, have become something that I have become able to trust pretty inherently. Knowing that if I have it sounding really good on our Atmos system in Atmos, that it will translate across the rest of the other formats. And that's not to say that that's a perfect science at all, but having a system that's capable of that definitely takes out a lot of the guesswork. And I would say for me, it's kind of been the same experience of when I first started mixing in stereo and having to check in mono. The idea of I used to check in mono when I mixed in stereo a lot more when I first started. And as I got more experienced, I didn't have to check in mono as often because I knew what those problems sounded like in stereo. So that's kind of the same idea that's happened with Atmos. The more that I've mixed in Atmos, the less time that I have to spend checking the fold downs because I kind of know what that sound is in the full speaker playback that could cause potential problems.
And just to quickly add to that, I would say that Atmos actually has a pretty wide sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
So you can move around fairly freely and still get a sense of immersion and still get a pretty good idea of what it sounds like and how it might translate. So again, if your room is set up well, you have a wider sweet spot than you think, really.
I think it's awesome too that you guys say that you also kind of rely on each other to go back and forth for QC as well and bounce mixes off of each other. It's nice to have that duality there in one place.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Shelly has asked a question about downward mix compatibility and specifically how you're managing your downward compatibility with your low-row stereo settings and kind of managing your headphone mixes.
Sure. Right now, I mean, we started with low row on our 5.1 render and then also our stereo render. And that was, I mean, when we first got into working in Atmos, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. But now we've kind of shifted over to using a direct render for the 5.1 fold down and then using a low row fold down from that 5.1 to the stereo. We haven't spent probably as much time as we would like to on the cross comparison of the different options that come with that. But at least the results that we are getting out of using the direct render and the low row to stereo seem to be translating really well. Like we mentioned in the webinar, there is an album that actually when I said was going to be released in a couple months. It was actually released last Friday. But in that situation, we used the stereo re-render, which was that direct render using the low row to get the stereo for all the stereo versions of those mixes. And we had great results with it.
Yeah, and with what we're doing, we've been able to have a pretty good idea ahead of time of how stuff is going to fold down or translate, what things might poke out, or tonally what might change a little bit, like if it goes to spatial audio or if it's just binaural. It's been pretty consistent.
Yeah.
So here's a gear question for you, which we always do get and people find very interesting, including myself as well. So what monitor controller and audio interface are you guys using? This is a question from Richard.
Sure. So we're using the Avid Matrix Studio as our main interface and doing all the monitor controlling through that as well. So that talks over Yukon to the Avid dock, which is kind of behind me, just out of the shot. And so that's where we'll use that for our volume control, and all the processing is happening within the Avid Matrix Studio.
Yeah.
Great. And Ninad asks about the Dolby Audio curve. How do you guys use the Dolby Atmos music curve when you're mixing? How do you adhere to it?
So that curve wasn't exactly in existence when we first started, at least not very publicly. And so when we first started, we tuned the room based off of kind of a curve of what we used to tune our stereo rigs off of, slightly modified, but not too much of a difference. And we had great results with that. The Dolby Atmos music's curve came out, and we kind of took a look at it, and between seeing what that curve was like, and then also the work that we had done and listening to commercial releases through the AV receiver we have up here in our Apple TV, and hearing how those translated, we decided to stick with what we had. That said, our curve is really not that different from what the Atmos curve, the Dolby curve is. We probably just don't taper quite as much as the top end off as the Atmos curve does. And I mean, at the end of the day, like the perspective that I have on it is really whatever you can trust. If you know your rig and you know it can translate to other systems and playback formats, then it really doesn't matter how it sounds like in your room. I might not agree with the way that it sounds, but as long as it sounds good on headphones on my end, then who am I to tell you that your room doesn't sound right, you know?
Yep. Diego has submitted a question on consultancy for Dolby Atmos, and I'm kind of translating this, so I hope I understand correctly, but he is asking, what is your personal advice for Dolby study or education? And I'll just jump in quickly to say that, you know, Dolby doesn't require mixers to be certified for Dolby Atmos music mixing, but you can certainly earn a certification from institutions that partner to deliver courses such as Abbey Road or Avid, for example. There is also the Dolby Atmos music self-paced learning curriculum at learning.dolby.com, which is available in Spanish and 4 other languages as well. So check out that site, scroll down to the bottom of that page and choose your language setting. But I'll ask you guys, you know, what sort of advice do you give to folks that are just, or friends in the community or colleagues that are looking to get going, mixing in Dolby Atmos? What are some of the initial steps and advice that you offer to them?
Well, everything you just said, plus do a lot of listening. Dolby's put out a lot of information. There are white papers if you want to get really technical. Make sure that, if nothing else, your speakers are set up in the recommended curve or distances that Dolby specifies. If you don't have the tools to do all of the tuning, start listening to it. Do the minimum you can. I mean, get a tape measure and try to get everything equidistant at least until you have a way to do delay and EQ and stuff with some kind of speaker processor. But really, it's just try it, do work in it, and do a lot of listening. Listen to as much commercial stuff as you can,
yeah,
and see what other people are doing, see what you like and don't like.
Yeah, and definitely to echo what you and Mike both said, the resources put forth by Dolby at this point are very comprehensive. When we started, that was very much in its infancy, so it was a lot of a lot of trial and error and a lot of kind of scrapping to find information. But all the Dolby Institute stuff and learning Dolby stuff now has been very, very well presented. So it's pretty great to be able to kind of search through that and use that as a learning tool.
Right on. We've had a couple of questions come in about multi-channel support natively on particular OSs, and you guys touched on it a little bit in the discussion that we had earlier. Have you had any further experimentation with direct out to avoid an AVR? And if not, what is kind of your preferred kind of AVR commercial playback testing scenario?
Yeah, sure. So we initially started with a Yamaha AVR that was a 714 AVR. That was really the only option that we had was that route when we started working in Atmos for hearing commercial work. The latest OS from Apple, and I'm not going to remember the name because there's so many of them now, but the most recent one expanded the core audio function in the computer to allow for a 714 output. So that means that you're now able to play, as long as you have a sound card that's selected that is capable of doing 12 channels, you're able to output 714 and have that be pushed directly from Apple Music.
Yeah, there's a really good article on Pro Tools Expert about how to do it. It details step by step how to do it.
Yeah. So I would definitely say check that out if you're interested in figuring out a way to do that without having to invest in an AV receiver. As we said in the video, we still use an AV receiver on our end. Part of that is because of just software compatibility at the moment with that OS and what we're using. So we haven't upgraded our studio computer to that latest OS. The other reason that we don't use that particular method is because we have a 914 rig, and with the OS, you're not able to output to wings to do a 914 or 916 output scheme. So we have since actually upgraded our receiver and now have one that can output at 914. And so that's a big reason that we have stuck with the AV receiver, is to hear the wing information from commercial releases.
Great, thanks. Jeff has asked, do you use a fixed monitoring level? And if so, what level? Guessing dB level there. Do you guys monitor at a fixed level?
I do.
Yeah, Mike does. I'm probably a little bit more variable. I'm not heavily variable. I would say if I have a 0 point, I probably shift plus or minus 3 to 6 dB either direction, just depending on what's kind of going on. And I think a lot of that is because when I'm working, hitting the level requirements for an Atmos mix are toward the end of my process. So there are times when I'm shifting things to get it closer to a regular listening level than just letting the monitor controller stay set. But normally at the end of my mix process, I'm pretty close to the -18 LUFS area, which then makes it a little easier for it to go to Mike, and Mike have a set reference standard, and it's easier for him too, and he can speak to that.
Yeah, and even with my stereo work, I'm still leaving the monitor controller set so that I'm monitoring around 85 dB, something like that, 83, 85, somewhere in there. If it's a really loud project, it might go slightly louder, but yeah, about 85.
Great, thanks. Jonathan is asking how you do bass management. In particular, are you using bass management on your overhead speakers, and are you using multiple subs for your LFE?
Sure. So our current system is not bass managed at all. The the KH120s in the ceiling are fairly full range. I mean, they start rolling off below 40, and being up in the ceiling, being against a boundary, they get a little extra support. And typically you're not putting a lot of low-end information up in the ceiling anyway. Ideally, would we like to have a completely full range speaker up there? Sure. Maybe in the next version of our studio we'll have that. And yes, we are using multiple subs. So each KH870 sub extends the left, center, and right 420s to be even fuller range. But we also sum the LFE channel through those 3 subs. I think they call it a plane wave array when you do something like that. And it just gives us a more even LFE dispersion. That's how I'd describe it. Yeah. Rather than it coming from one spot, maybe even in the corner of the room, it's spread across the front a little more evenly, and so it measures better.
Great, thank you. We're right up against it. One more question from Ryan here. Are you using the renderer to print your mixes, or are you bouncing via Pro Tools?
Depends. Mostly on the sample rate. If we're at 96K, we have to print into the renderer. There's no other way. So that'll be a real-time bounce. When we're at 48K, ever since Pro Tools has come out with their ADM offline render, that has been the way of choice for me, just to save time. I have had, I believe, once or twice an issue. So with that said, I would not recommend using the offline bounce and sending it off without QC and reference ever. Make sure that you check it. I would say percentage-wise, that's happened maybe 1%, 2% of the time. Very, very few times has that happened. But depending on what stage you're at and if it's going to mastering, that could be like it could get released with a problem in it. So just be aware that with the offline render, there could be a stutter or a hiccup depending on what happens.
Great, thanks. And with that, we will end this session. Thanks everybody for joining this Dolby Atmos music community session featuring Webster and Mike from Axis Audio in Nashville. Guys, thank you so much for your time and your amazing wisdom. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was a pleasure.
Anytime.
Cheers. And folks can email us at musicwebinars@dolby.com with comments and questions, as I said. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.